Be sharing my time today with the honourable member from Calgary, Midnapore. First of all, I too would like to congratulate the member from Mount Royal on his fabulous speech. I would like to cut and paste his speech over to my time if I could, but I don't think our technology is there yet. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in the House today to support my colleague's motion that the House reject the boycott, divestment and sanctions, the BDS movement, which promotes the demonization and the delegitimization of the State of Israel, and call upon the government to condemn any and all attempts by Canadian organizations, groups or individuals to promote the BDS movement both here at home and abroad. Mr. Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for Edmonton West, with a population of some 5,500 people of Jewish faith in our riding, many of whom have ties of Israel, I'm proud to stand here in support of this motion. As a member of the organization called CUFI, the Christians United for Israel, I am extremely proud to stand here today. Not too long ago, I attended service at the Beth Israel Synagogue in my riding of Edmonton West. The rabbi, my personal friend, Rabbi Daniel Friedman, is a leader of the interfaith community in the riding. He has reached out to the leadership of local Christian churches and to our mosque so that together they can work together to promote harmony among the faithful. That very morning of the service, he came to me to tell me that night before the synagogue had once again been defaced with hateful graffiti. Once again defaced. Anti-Semitism unfortunately still exists, and BDS do nothing except to promote it. What the people behind BDS will never tell you is this: Israel is multicultural, multiracial, diverse, and tolerant. The truth is that the most powerful antidote to the apartheid lie. We devoted aggressively disseminating this truth to everyone. BDS activists promote this false idea that Israel is solely responsible for the Arab-Israeli conflict, and in turn push for a boycott of the only liberal democracy in the Middle East while exempting the world's worst human rights violators from such attention. These boycotts take many forms, from telling consumers not to buy Israeli products to calling for universities to cut ties with Israeli professors and academics, and to call for Israelis to be banned from international sports competitions. By advocating economic coercion against Israelis, BDS's assault on all Israelis, including, ironically, those Israelis who are staunch peace activists. And BDS uses the kind of language and imagery reserved for pariah states. Mr. Speaker, there are several reasons why we must reject BDS in all of its forms. For one, BDS is a form of discrimination, is targeting all Israelis. BDS is a modern-day blacklist and a form of discrimination based on national origin. Just as boycotts have targeted Jews throughout history, today BDS activists call for a boycott of the citizens of the world's only Jewish state and the only liberal democracy in the Middle East. Many leaders of the BDS movement openly declare that their goal isn't a peaceful two-state solution, but rather the destruction of the State of Israel. The BDS movement is not pro-Palestinian, it is simply anti-Israel. Let me state that again: the BDS movement is not pro-Palestinian, it is not about helping people of Palestine, it's about punishing Israelis and punishing Jews. To further this, BDS undermines peace, something that all members of this House want. BDS does nothing to bring the two sides together, to promote peace, or to improve the quality of life of the average Palestinian. Instead, BDS lays all the blame on the conflict on Israel and removes all responsibility from the Palestinians. Were BDS successful, it would threaten the livelihood of thousands of Palestinians employed by Israeli companies. BDS also imports this conflict into Canada. BDS does this by illegitimately targeting businesses, universities, university students, civil society institutions. Canadian organizations never be manipulated as a platform for social exclusion and the demonization of Canadians based on their national origin or their religious beliefs, both of which are at odds with Canadian values. Mr. Speaker, BDS has already failed. Boycotts of Israeli companies are ineffective and time and again have only mobilized the Jewish and pro-Israeli communities to buy the very products targeted for boycott. Despite calls for BDS, the Israeli economy has experienced immense growth, as have business, academic, and cultural ties between Israelis and Canadians. Even more so, BDS hurts those it claims to be helping. Kristen Lindo, Senior Vice President of Moody's Investors Service and Moody's lead analyst for Israel, has pointed out this very fact. She made this point in an interview with Forbes magazine, and I quote, "The impact of BDS is more psychological than real so far and has no discernible impact on Israeli trade or the broader economy. The sanctions do run the risk of hurting the Palestinian economy, which is much smaller and poorer than that of Israel, as seen in the case of the Soda Stream," unquote. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move away from the politics of the Israeli-Palestinian relations for a moment to bring the attention to the South of the economics of the relationship between the two. Regardless of what your personal thoughts are in Israel or Palestine, the numbers speak for themselves. Israel, with a population of just over 8 million people, has a GDP of just under $300 billion. Palestinian territories, with a population of 4 million, has a GDP of $11 billion. Israeli sales to the Palestinian Authority were $4.3 billion, about 5% of Israeli exports, and less than 2% of the Israeli GDP. 2012, Palestinian sales to Israel accounted for 81% of Palestinian exports. Palestinian purchases from Israel were 2/3 of total Palestinian imports. Palestine enjoys a trade surplus with Israel that has tripled over the past several years. Such trade flow asymmetry shows Palestine needs Israel. Yet the BDS crowd would impair economic ties between these areas, something that would hurt Palestinians. Additionally, despite evidence that trade actually brings people closer together and closer to the ultimate goal of peace, BDS supporters want to obliterate the vast trade surplus Israel extends to Palestine and offer nothing in its place, something that would damage relations between Israelis and Palestinians and something that would lessen peace in the region. While I know some members in this House may claim that economic benefits that Palestinians receive are grossly overstated, even the Palestinian National Authority's newspaper, Al-Hayat Al-Jadida, found that salaries and benefits are vastly higher across the board for Palestinians that work for Israeli companies. And do you know why, Mr. Speaker? It's because Israel does not discriminate. Israel and Israelis alike do not care where they come from, which religion they belong to, or the societal groups. Instead, they focus on the hard work, perseverance, and diligence that individuals bring to the job. Israeli companies open doors for Palestinians to provide opportunities for them despite the political conflicts that may be ongoing. Mr. Speaker, I know some members may find the arguments being presented to be rather one-sided. And I'm going to quote from a gentleman who's been quoted earlier today, Bassam Eid, a Palestinian human rights activist, political analyst, and commentator on Palestinian domestic affairs. He wrote an article on this, on the BDS movement, and how it does not in any way quell the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Part of his article goes, unfortunately, almost all of those who ostensibly dedicated to finding a solution may have their own agendas, and these may not be the advantage of either Palestinians or Israelis. A prime case in this movement, in this boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. As a Palestinian dedicated to working for peace and reconciliation between my people and our Israeli neighbors, I do not believe that the BDS advocates are helping our cause. On the contrary, they're creating more hatred, enmity, and polarization. There's no connection between the tactics and objectives of the BDS movement and the on-the-ground realities of the Middle East. Israelis continue to come to the West Bank to do business, and most Palestinians continue to buy Israeli goods. Indeed, if you ask Palestinians what they want, they'll tell you they want jobs, secure education, and health. He goes on to say the BDS spokespeople justify calling for boycotts that will result in increased economic hardships for Palestinians by asserting that Palestinians are willing to suffer deprivations in order to achieve their freedom. It goes without saying that they themselves live in comfortable circumstances elsewhere in the world and will not suffer any such hardship themselves. It would seem, in fact, that the BDS movement, in its determination to oppose Israel, is prepared to fight to the last drop of Palestinian blood. As a Palestinian who actually lives in East Jerusalem and hopes to build a better life for his family and community, this is the kind of pro-Palestinian activism that we could do well without. For our own sake, we need to reconcile with our Israeli neighbors, not reject and revile them, unquote. Mr. Speaker, Israel is among the freest and most democratic nations in the world, and is certainly the freest and most democratic nation in the Middle East. Mr. Speaker, that is why our Conservative caucus is putting forward this motion, a motion calling upon this House to support Israel by rejecting the boycott, divestment, and sanctions and condemning organizations that promote this ludicrous movement. As the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, Israel reflects the values and beliefs that we Canadians hold near and dear to our hearts. Values like respect for democratic rule, the tolerance of multiracial, multi-religious society, and respect for the rule of law. Israel's Arab citizens enjoy more rights than Arabs in any other country in the world. They serve in the Knesset, Israel's version of our parliament, in the judiciary, in the foreign service, and in all facets of Israeli society. Sadly, some Canadian universities...
Order. 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 Sorry, the time has expired for the members' remarks, and now we'll go to questions and comments. The honourable member for Mount Royal.
Wow. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for his excellent comments, and I would note that one of the things that's very interesting is that Arab women in Israel got the right to vote when Israel became independent in 1948, before Arab women were allowed to vote in any Arab state. And so I know that my honourable colleague didn't get a chance to quite finish what it was that he was going to say, so I'm wondering if he would like to tell us what he would have said had he been able to wrap up.
The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you for the question. I wish I could have more questions like that, perhaps for my own family, as opposed to being told to just be quiet. I will just close very quickly saying I strongly encourage all members of this House to support this motion condemning the BDS movement. Supporting this motion would send a signal to Canadians in the world that we as a nation stand tall with our friend and our ally Israel, a nation of peace, prosperity, tolerance, that attack our track record of sound human rights for all time. Thank you very much. Really, just to finish up, you're right, Arabs, minorities, gays, Christian minorities, Yazidis, Maronites all enjoy rights, privileges in Israel that are not enjoyed anywhere else in Middle Eastern countries. So it's one of the reasons why myself, our colleagues, and plenty of members across the way support this, the country, and this motion to denounce the BDS movement. Thank you again.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure as the mayor of Hamilton in entertaining a delegation of Israeli mayors. Some were Jewish, some were Muslim. And I still have a commemorative plate from the mayor of Zemmer, an Arabic-speaking Muslim, who came with a delegation, as I say, of both Jewish and Muslim mayors to the city of Hamilton. And so I'm reflecting on the honourable colleague across the way's remarks about the hardships that some people are willing to impose on other people, because the discussions that we had dealt with a cooperation among those Israeli municipalities of both Jewish and Muslim origin in terms of the mayors and the populations. So I would ask for comment by the member across the way on the sensitivity in Israel of outside oppressive acts which would tend to disrupt a society that is moving toward a peaceful existence.
West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank you for your question. Obviously, it's a very difficult situation over there, and obviously Israel has a role to play in the peace movement. I found from my own community, working with, as I mentioned, my friend Rabbi Daniel Friedman, the people from our local mosque and Christian churches in our area, that there is desire among the interfaith group to work together for peace and move forward. And I think very much the path that your associates you met over there taking is the way to go. Working together, working toward peace, prosperity for their people, and together and without outside influence.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Port Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my colleague on an excellent speech. One of the arguments we've heard against this motion is from those who claim that somehow it would limit freedom of speech. And yet in this House in 2006 and 2010,
we had motions where the House strongly expressed its disagreement with things that were published in one case a newspaper, in another case a magazine. So we know that there is a difference between limiting freedom of speech on the one hand, but on the other hand, the House expressing itself strongly on behalf of shared values. So could the member share a bit about why this motion doesn't actually violate freedom of speech and really highlight that distinction between something that limits freedom of speech on the one hand, but something else what this motion is, which is the House expressing itself in a collective way about the problems of the BDS movement?
The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you for your speech. I appreciate that. I think with the BDS movement, it's not an issue of free speech. It's an issue of promoting hate. I think there's a very specific defined line between public discourse that we are enjoying here in the House today and what is promoted by the BDS. We've seen it in universities. We've seen it on the streets where the BDS movement shuts down all discourse. They claim to speak for freedom of speech, but in fact they use it to shout down people who wish to speak on it. They shout down, prevent students in universities from speaking and expressing their own free will.